Hey guys, so I have a really special guest here. I have Sargon of Akkad, who hopefully we're going to have an interesting conversation with. How's it going, man?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well as well, man. So, to start this out, because a lot of people, including myself, are very it seems that it's ambiguous as to where you fall on the political spectrum. Could you sort of explain where you would describe yourself on the political spectrum as well as some of your positions?
Sure. I mean, when I do a political compass test, I always and very consistently fall centre left in my policy preferences, and so I've always considered myself to be part of the left. But in recent years, I've been exiled from the left for being a liberal and not a progressive. And I think it really comes down to a sort of fundamental difference in worldview between liberals and progressives. And I think there are a lot of ex left wingers who are now kind of just floating freely amongst all of the various political persuasions looking for a new home. And I think I'm one of those.
Okay, so when it comes to that, right? In the sense of the political spectrum, you're still a left winger. It's not like you're no longer a left winger. You just say that the left has left you or something like that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically that's how I view it. I mean, I'm a left winger from sort of 2003. So I was opposed to George Bush's Iraq invasion. I was totally in favor of Assange and Manning and Snowden and leaks from the inside. I'm in favor of our socialized healthcare in Britain. I understand the need for a welfare state because I've had to use it myself in the past. So it's not that I'm against these things existing. The problem is, in my opinion, that the progressive left have become a disempowerment movement, and I can't stand that.
Okay,
I
so
can't be part of anything
okay,
like that.
so okay, so the progressive liberal divide you're talking about, because I would describe it as much different than you would. So,
Okay.
uh, I'm just curious, so we could kind of define these terms specifically.
Yeah.
Because like I would say that Kyle Kalinske and David Packman, they both would self call themselves progressives. Are you placing them in the same category that you're saying is kind of pushing you away from being part of the
Um,
left?
I think that David Packman and Carl Kalinske, they want to be progressives, but they're too liberal at heart. They can't bring themselves to get on board with identity politics,
Right.
which means that they're kind of on the outer fringes of progressivism. I think that they've got a sort of moral desire to go down that road, but their principles won't let them carry on, and eventually they're going to have to make a choice between collectivism and individualism, and hopefully they'll make the sensible choice. I'm sure they will.
So what specifically do you mean by collectivism and individualism?
Well, exactly as those words are literally used, as in, do they think that the protection of the individual is more important, or do they think the protection of the group is more important? And at some point, they're going to have to make that choice.
But could you be more specific though? Because I feel like it's more that's sort of ambiguous. Because I mean, would you consider certain policies to be for the I mean, universal healthcare is technically for the collective, right?
No, universal healthcare is for everyone.
Right. So isn't that
It's an individualist policy. It doesn't pick and choose a certain demographic or group in society to privilege with a certain set of privileges. But I mean, if you're talking about something like affirmative action, that absolutely is a collectivist policy that specifically chooses a target demographic and says these people and not the rest. And usually it's based on an arbitrary factor like race or gender, which I mean, I just can't support racial or gender discrimination. So
okay? So, but you've also said that you're for what you would call sort of affirmative action for poor people, essentially, right?
yeah, because being poor isn't an immutable arbitrary characteristic. It's a description of a life circumstance you find yourself in. I mean, I've personally been poor and not poor at different times in my life. So it's not that that's something that, it's not locking out a group of people. It's helping a group of people who are unable for the circumstance in the moment to help themselves. And even then, I've been thinking about this a lot. And I can't say that I think the way that social care is being handled at the moment is productive. There seems to be I guess, a kind of wishful thinking on the left that we can give people prosperity, and that's not true. You can't give people prosperity.
Okay, so what you're saying is you're essentially somebody who would be open to things like affirmative action, but on socioeconomic grounds that aren't just specifically on race, but rather because I've seen you get in disagreements with other people about that, where they disagree with that as well. So that's your position.
Yeah, I mean, nobody identifies as poor. That's a description of what they are. People do everything they can to try and not be poor. So it's not the same thing as having a race-based or gender-based affirmative action. And even then, I would like to try doing things that weren't based on affirmative action. But I mean, there are going to be some circumstances where there's just no choice. But even then, I think having programs open to people who earn less than X, I think is perfectly reasonable.
So you're okay. So you're fine with that. Have you ever described yourself with the term classical liberal?
Oh, absolutely.
So you use that term?
Yeah, it's the intellectual tradition that I come from.
But classical liberalism is essentially libertarianism, though, in terms of economic policy.
Well, I mean, kind of. The thing is, the problem with libertarianism, in my opinion, is the same problem that infests almost every political wing at the moment. It's the blaming of the problems on X. In libertarianism, it's the state. They blame all problems on the state. I don't blame all problems on the state. For the alt-right, it's the Jews. For the far left, it's the patriarchy. And it's never that simple. It's just never that simple, and it's redundant and reductive. And like I said, I'm not against government doing things. I am for government doing things that are productive. I think it's just a case of what you consider to be right and wrong use of the government. For example, I very much despise debating corporate regulation with libertarians, because they've got this funny idea that the market will solve all problems, not thinking about they'll say, well, I mean, let's say company X puts out a poison product. I mean, the Yelp reviews will reflect that, and people will avoid going there, and they'll change because otherwise people will die. And it's like, okay, but how many people have to die in the meantime?
Yeah.
That some light regulation, as in you're not allowed to put poisonous ingredients in your product or something, would have saved. And so this is why I'm not a libertarian. But it's the same intellectual tradition, but I don't take it the way that libertarians take it. I think everything's down to interpretation. I mean, technically, I'm what you would call a social liberal, because I'm okay with certain social programs and social healthcare.
Would you say you're a social democrat?
Depends how you're defining that, to be honest.
Okay, so a social democrat is essentially someone who they believe in capitalism with the heavy welfare state and regulation.
Yeah.
So that's what you define. Because that and classical liberal are very much different. And I think that in a time now where political terms are just so, divisive,
the reason I use the term classical liberal is because ultimately that's where my core principles are. And I use that term specifically to differentiate myself from a socialist, because there is an innate tendency for people to think that anyone who is in favor of a social program must also be a socialist. And so progressives very much are socialists these days, as far as I can tell. And I use the term classical liberal to let people know that I am not a continental in my philosophy.
Okay, so I just want to say that those two terms could not be more different, and I'm not necessarily saying that you're not left-wing. I'm just saying that if you want to describe yourself correctly, I think that it's contributing to the whole sort of situation that we have of confusion on the term classical liberal, because a classical liberal date back to people like Herbert Spencer, who did not want any government regulation and pretty much are opposed to pretty much everything that you're advocating for now. So I'm not really trying to say you're not.
Yeah, but times change. I mean, things, and like I said, I really use the term just to make sure that people are aware. But even then, it doesn't change where I fall on the political compass.
Right,
and the thing is, this is another thing I'm not prepared to do as well. I'm not prepared to just give over left wing policies to socialists. I'm not prepared to just concede the entire left to socialists.
Right? Yeah, you
I mean,
shouldn't.
exactly, and it's incredibly presumptive to think that you can't be for the basic principles of classical liberalism and see that in reality you have to make a pragmatic compromise on certain things in order to create a better society. But that doesn't mean that socialist principles are good principles. They're absolutely not.
Okay, okay. So, what are your thoughts on the Trump presidency?
That's a good
Just
question.
kind of general speaking, because I think a lot of people are getting
Yeah.
torn on your opinions on that, and that kind of adds to the confusion that we have.
Okay, so I read. I wasn't really a supporter of Trump during the presidential campaign. Really, I was an opponent of Hillary, which I think a lot of people on the left can feel me on.
Yeah,
I just she's like an avatar of the corruption of the deep state,
yeah,
and all of the forces that had aligned behind her were. It was every major institution, every the media, Hollywood, all of the political system, all of the component parts of the political system. They were all rooting for her, and it was like, right, okay, so something is drastically wrong when that happens, especially when you have a populist candidate that is going around filling out arenas just to stand there for an hour and just talk like Donald Trump,
yeah.
because he's hardly the most articulate man in the world, and so the fact that he can pack out arenas that tells you that something is desperately wrong with the balance of power in your country, and so Donald Trump really is an important corrective force, because frankly the left had become an unbearable nuisance in everyone's daily lives as far as I was concerned,
So
and
you wouldn't
in
call
my own.
yourself an opponent of Trump?
No, no. Now I'm a supporter of Trump. Now I'm a full-on supporter of Trump. I've got a MAGA hat on a chair behind me. In fact, I went to Trump Tower and got it.
Oh,
The left, it's been very much the same attitude in my country with Brexit as well. Although Brexit wasn't strictly a partisan left-right issue, there have been a lot of people who have effectively turned it into one, despite the fact that our prime minister still doesn't want to leave the EU. But the left's inability to admit that it was wrong is infuriating. And
well, so who are
at
you
this
specifically
point,
talking about here? Because the
oh,
left isn't just one entity. Even
true.
it's not even
What?
close.
Okay, progressives are the people I'm talking about. Um, you know exactly the types I'm talking about. The sort of MSNBC watching Guardian reading types. The latte liberals who sit in Starbucks and sip their coffees as they tap on their apples. The people who ended up doing some sort of sociological major in university and are only earning 35 grand a year now.
Okay, so
That who I'm talking about.
okay, so that's who you're specifically talking about.
Yeah.
So you seriously wouldn't have, you didn't consider yourself an opponent of Trump during the election.
Not an opponent, but I didn't consider myself a supporter. But I definitely am now, just because he makes the insufferable left howl, and I love it.
Okay, so you're now not an opponent of Trump?
No, I'm a supporter of him.
You're actually a supporter of Trump.
Oh yeah,
And why is that?
because he drives the left crazy.
Okay,
He drives left wing activists insane, and he makes them look ridiculous. And I think it's amazing. And the left has to reform itself. There's no getting around it. You cannot spend the last 5 years demonizing your opponents for being white, straight, and male, and then expect any mercy when you end up losing finally.
it's not fair to say that the entire left did that, though.
Okay, but are you saying this isn't a characteristic of the left?
I definitely would not say it's an overarching characteristic of the left. I think your everyday people would
You think
your
it's
everyday
not an
people.
overarching?
No, I don't. I think that it's a sort of concentrated group of people that you're talking about. I think if you talk to everyday people who are left wing or independents who lean left, I don't think that they're demonizing people who are white or being a guy or whatever.
Really?
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Maybe the average everyday left wing voter isn't, but it just seems that the worst of you end up on CNN and MSNBC and on TV on panel shows. They at rallies. I mean, it's at music events. It's amazing how Linda Sarsour has a platform.
Okay,
You
yeah.
know,
So Linda Sarsour, I think, is a complete moron, and I think that all
Uh,
serious left wingers can come out against her, and I don't think that she represents any serious chunk of the left.
She does. She does represent a serious chunk of the left, and she gets a platform because of it, despite the opposition from within the left that she gets. But she's not the only one. It's like just Google CNN and white people. just the number, like the number of articles from left wing news sources like Salon, Mike. There's a whole list of them. Like, and they're quite well read. The Huffington Post, things like this, and they just white people and men. These two words. I mean, you could not get away with doing that with any other demographic in place of white and men there, and yet here we are. We've got to the point now where people don't care about being shamed for being white and male. It's not a vote winner.
I wouldn't agree. I would agree that there are some stupid articles like that, but so what you're saying is your entire political support behind a candidate is due to some stupid articles written by some stupid people in this really marginal group.
No.
So how would you? Okay, so because
how about this? Right, okay. My government has at the moment discriminatory racial policies against white people.
In what terms?
In terms of hiring.
In terms of hiring.
Yes, they literally say for our state-funded broadcast of the BBC, this research position but there are many obviously, just like a research position that is not open to white people.
Okay, and I don't really have the ground to talk about that specifically because I don't know anything about that. But
I know, but what I'm saying is this is a product of left-wing thought.
As well. It's not really the US.
Yeah, but you guys have got many similar things. I mean, this is why when Milo Yiannopoulos creates his privilege grant, it creates such a stir because you guys have all of the same kind of institutional benefits for non-white people and non-male people, despite the fact that women are actually the majority of your population in your country. And I mean, you've got things like in Canada where you literally have the progressive stack being implemented in some Canadian universities where teachers will just not call on white men because of their purported historic privilege. I mean, this is... I can't believe you will try and deny the effect that social justice has had on the modern left. I'm honestly amazed by it. It's like it's being put into Canadian law. That's why Jordan Peterson is famous. It's being put into our laws, and it's being put into your laws. New York City, you get sued or fined for something like $250,000 if you deliberately misgender someone.
That's not true.
Is that not true?
That is not. Give me one example that had $250,000 for misgendering someone.
Okay, hang on. Let me just. Okay, I'll put the link in the chat. Now, I mean, if that's fake news, do tell me that that's fake news because I would like to know. But
the Daily Caller. That's interesting.
What's wrong with the Daily Caller?
It's a clear conservative propaganda site, but I'll still look at it.
Yeah, but how's that any different to something like the Washington Post?
Oh, I wouldn't say the Washington Post is left wing.
Really?
Especially not the equivalent of the Daily Caller.
Maybe. I mean, I definitely call the Daily Caller the equivalent of like the Independent in this country. But generally I find with sort of centre right and centre left, despite their obvious biases, they don't tend to just openly report things that are counterfactual. So
I have to look at this more closely.
Sure.
I have to look into
But this is just the beginning of what they're doing with this ideology. It's not receding, it's advancing, and it needs to be stopped because it's doing real damage to the sort of core ethos of the West. And I really can't stand that.
I can't find any article on this story that is not from one of these right-wing propaganda sites.
Okay, look. I consider your show to be a left-wing propaganda show.
That's fair.
Yeah. So you saying their right-wing propaganda has no value. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means they're the opposing team, doesn't it?
Hold on, let me look at this.
Okay, is WND.com a right wing propaganda site?
I don't know what this website is.
No, I'm not particularly familiar with it either. I mean, there are loads of places that are reporting this, so
Which ones? I mean, I tried looking at it. The Libertarian Republic, Right Wing
yeah,
News.
yeah, but that doesn't make them liars, does it?
Well, why isn't it covered by all the other outlets? I don't understand. This is something I'll have to
Okay,
look into. I can't.
that's the trick with propaganda, right? The best propaganda is not where you lie; you just omit things that you don't want people to know.
So you're saying that there's essentially a collusion by every single other known outlet. The only outlets that report on this
No,
huge story is the Daily
no.
Caller and WND, and they're all
I'm not
colluding
suggesting
together.
there's any collusion involved. I'm suggesting there's bias involved.
And that bias extends to everybody.
Oh yeah, I mean, you openly admit you're a left-wing propaganda show.
Right.
Like the left is wildly biased. I'm not saying the right isn't, but the left still is.
Okay. Well, that's something I'll have to look into, but
Go
we'll
ahead.
we'll uh we'll move on here.
Hmm.
So your channel has been mainly focused on both feminists and SJWs for a very long time. And I was curious as to if you're ever going to criticize the right wing uh, outside of what's been going on with this whole all right thing, which we'll get into in a bit.
Well, I have done. I mean, I've got a video from I think I did it in 2015 where it's about the Conservative Party in Britain, just saying the Conservatives are your enemy. But I mean, I'm not really bothered about the. You could spend all day every day like doing just dunking pieces on right wingers. It'd be easy to do and it'd be dull
I would argue the
because the
same
right
thing about the feminists and SJWs.
well you can argue that the problem I have is that they're actively advancing their agenda. That's the if like crazy right wingers, if like flat earthers, if there were flat earthers in governments and they were enacting flat earth policies, I would be making videos against flat earthers.
But why? So okay. So we have Trump as president. Every branch is
Hmm.
controlled by the Republicans. They're
Yeah.
putting in place policies that disagree with your your worldview, but you're not making any videos on it. So, for example, the tax bill that was passed under Donald Trump.
Hmm.
Did you
I
talk about
haven't
that
been
at all?
following it. I haven't been following the tax bill. Tell me about the tax bill.
So in the tax bill, the corporate rate was dropped, the estate tax was eliminated, the corporate tax rates that went down,
Okay.
they're permanent, but there are some individual tax cuts that came in for middle class and low class people, but those are temporary, and 83% of the gains from this tax cut will go to the rich, as well
Hmm.
as on top of that, the deficits will be exploding through the roof. And a poll came in recently saying that the majority of Americans did not see their paychecks rise due to this tax cut, while Steve Mnuchin said that over 90% of wage earners would see wage raises, and a plurality or majority, I can't recall, of that group that said that their paycheck did rise. It was either insignificant or just something that was barely anything.
Okay. Now I would have to go and research that and see what the actual facts are, wouldn't I?
That's fine.
I can't. I mean, what you've given me there is a narrative, and I'm sure that it's not inaccurate. But what I mean is, I now have to go and find out where you're leaving parts out of that. But let's assume that it's exactly as you say. Okay, Donald Trump cut taxes. I'm for tax cuts. Like most economists will tell you that a tax cut is good for the economy
Why is that?
because the economy is based on people spending money, and the more money that they have left after paying taxes, the more money that they can spend.
Yes, I understand that, but if most of the tax cuts are going to rich people, and we know that has not worked out historically, why would that be good?
Because it also went to middle class people.
Yes, some of it
It's
did.
it's a blanket tax cut, isn't it?
It's not blanket. It has different tax cut rates, and I believe for the lowest rate, it went up.
Right. Okay. Well, I'd have to look, but I mean, I saw the headlines for it, and I assumed that it was just a blanket tax cut, so I didn't pay attention to it. But either way, I mean, it's just better for people to pay less taxes. And I'm talking about like the poor people here.
Okay, so if 83% of the tax cuts went to the rich, which is what I'm claiming, a lefty propagandist, which you'll have to look up later on. If that is true, let's hypothetically say.
Well, let's take the way you're characterizing that, right? Because 83% of the tax cuts don't go to the rich. That's not how it works. You're mischaracterizing the nature of the way money is earned and the way taxes are paid. Like 83% of the money saved from taxes may be going to people that you put in. I don't know, how are you defining rich? Just out of interest.
I don't have the exact numbers, but people I believe who are something like over 1%, in the 1% or above.
Okay, but how much is that? Is that like 100 grand a year, a million a year, something?
No, it's a lot higher than 100 grand a year. I don't have that exact number.
Right. Okay, but I mean, if when you've got like billionaires like Zuckerberg and Bill Gates who are raking in God knows how much a minute, then I mean, if they have if they're included in any analysis of people, how much they have left after a tax cut, then yeah, they're going to obviously disproportionately deform the end result. But that's the way you're conceiving it is that this is a certain closed system, and I used to conceive of this the way myself until I did some reading on economics. Actually, I was under the impression that it was kind of a closed system as well. And so when you say, look, 83% of that has been given to the rich, that's not true, because the implication is that it's been taken from someone else. But that was not someone else's money. And
that's not what I'm trying to imply.
The 13% that goes to people who are earning however much a year and they're having a tax cut of their own, yeah, it's less because they earn less money, but it's still good for them to have a tax cut.
Yeah, it is.
But there's no way of putting a tax cut in place that doesn't, I suppose, what you would call advantage the rich because they have more money.
No, you could put in specific. I mean, there's tax brackets. You can lower lower certain tax rates for certain people.
But as I understood it, it was just a blanket tax cut. But again, if it's not, do let me know. I mean, if Donald Trump is literally saying that people are earning over $1 million a year or something are getting a tax cut and everyone else can get screwed, then obviously I'm against that.
Well, it's different. It's different levels of. It's different tax cuts for different groups.
Really? Okay, I haven't looked into it, but.
So I'm just curious because as a Trump supporter yourself, I'm just failing to understand that. I guess you're saying that you're for the tax cuts, and I guess if that's the case, then I guess what I'm saying is I guess doesn't make sense. But I guess we'll switch over to the example of his attempt to repeal Obamacare. Or sorry, you want to interject? Go ahead.
I don't want to have to get into Obamacare because honestly, I don't. It's a very complex system, and I haven't spent enough time studying it. And so because every time I hear an argument from an American about Obamacare, it's either very much in favor or very much against. And honestly, The quickest way to explain my position on American healthcare is I had a meetup with a bunch of guys in New York, and one of them was saying, "Look, I totally understand what you mean, but you've got to understand America, right? Imagine if the European Union was going to control your healthcare," and instantly it clicked in my head, and I was like, "Oh my god, yeah, that would be a terrible idea." It seems to me that each state should manage its own healthcare.
So you're saying there should be no federally run healthcare?
Yeah, I think each state should run its own healthcare for the people living in the state, obviously. Paid for by the people living in the state, obviously. And that way, isn't that the beauty of the American system? It's like, that each state is an experiment of its own.
Yeah, I think that works in certain cases, but I think that the federal government should have policies that affect all states.
Well, in certain ways, yeah, in certain terms. But I mean, I can completely understand the fear of letting the federal government deal with healthcare across the entire country. I do honestly think that, like, I mean, this is the thing, right? Because when you say, "Oh, but look at European healthcare," it wouldn't be applied in the same way in America. I mean, if you guys want a European style healthcare system, then Texas has to have its own NHS. Then Ohio has to have its own NHS that's separate from the other ones.
Well, what do you mean? Because the NHS stands for National Healthcare System,
Yeah,
so
but
it's
each
national.
nation in Europe is about the size of a
Right.
state in the United
Yeah.
States,
So what we're talking
and
about is different countries in Europe have different systems. So you're in the UK right now. The UK has
yeah,
its NHS system,
yeah,
which is the system for all of the UK, right?
yeah, it is, yeah.
So are you in support of that, or are you not in support of that?
Yeah, but I'm not in support of Brussels, which is and Strasbourg, which is where the European Union resides, doing controlling and managing the healthcare for Britain and Sweden and France and Germany and Poland and Spain. And do you see my point? I think that the Texans should do their own healthcare. I think that the Ohioans should do their own healthcare. I think the Californians should do their own healthcare in much the same way that Britain, France, and Germany and whatnot do their own healthcare. I really don't think that trying to get the federal government to do it. I mean that's a terrifying prospect, and they're going to fuck that up, mate. I mean, wasn't Obamacare massively messed up when it was first put into place?
Well, when it was first into place, there were some glitches that were happening with signups, yeah, but most of those problems have
Yeah.
subsided.
Well, yeah, sure, but I mean, this is my point though. It's like an overextended bureaucracy comes with its own problems. It would definitely be better, I think, to have the states controlling their healthcare. But again, I'm all in favor of like a social healthcare program in each state because I mean ultimately it's cheaper for the people who've got to use it. I tell you, there's nothing more terrifying to me. When I was growing up, like we get a lot of American media, and I didn't know how the healthcare system worked when I was a kid, and you'd see American media, and they'd be talking about people going bankrupt from getting ill and not being able to afford surgery and whatnot. And I remember thinking, my God, that's terrifying. And then I realized that we don't have that problem. So
So okay, okay. Let's just. I guess we'll switch topic here.
okay,
So you had a little outfall or a fallout, I should say, with the alt right, and that kind of started with your debate with Richard Spencer. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that. I was curious about that.
oh no, I mean I've been opposed to the alt right for well since their inception. I mean, when the alt right first came around, I was one of the first people who sort of gave them a fair shake. And I interviewed dozens of alt-right people, and then I did a video called "An Honest Look at the Alt-Right." It's probably in 2016 that I did that, something like that, 2015. And I mean, then I identified them as racial collectivists. I'm an individualist, so I mean, the alt-right to me look like the mirror image of large swathes of the progressive left. Where the progressive left has set the table saying, right, we need black interests, women interests, Latino interests, all this sort of stuff. The alt-right have come to the table and said, great, we're interested in talking about racial interests too. Let's talk about white interests. And they've been told that they're not allowed to do that. I don't think we should be talking about any group interests because I don't think we should be privileging groups. But that's just me.
And so, could you kind of talk about the whole fallout that happened? I think a lot of people are interested in that. How did it start? Because you got a lot of
Oh,
backlash from it.
well, yeah, but I mean, the alt right don't like me. Why? They're very angry. They're very dispossessed, disenfranchised. They've got no institutional power. They're being persecuted off every platform that they're on. Richard Spencer recently had his website altright.com shut down, which I disagree with immensely, because it's a terrible path to go on. I mean, they're not going to. They probably will eventually go away, but they'll be replaced by something else. It's the problems that they are identifying are real problems. It's just their solutions are really bad. So what we should do is ignore what the alt-right have to say, but listen to the problems that they're identifying. Focus on those.
But if they're an entirely identitarian movement, which openly advocates for whether it be an ethno state or white
Hmm.
supremacy, why listen to their problems if they're white supremacists and white ethno state advocates?
Because they're still citizens.
Yes, but if that's their positions, why wouldn't that be a disqualifier in terms of taking in their wouldn't their problems automatically be compromised, especially if you're someone who is and anti-identitarian if their entire solution to the problems are we
Well, I
either
don't agree
believe
with their
in white
solutions.
supremacy. Okay, I understand that. Yeah, so we have that set. But
Okay, so the difference is taking things as they are rather than taking things as we would like them to be. So you've got to be a realist. I mean, if like mass immigration, there are Mexican gangs all along the south of the United States that are they're murdering people. They're doing terrible things, and so when Donald Trump talks about immigrants that are being deported who are animals, he's not joking and he's not wrong. But for a progressive lefty type sat in an ivory tower somewhere, who don't see the shanty towns who haven't lost people to violence, they don't care, and they just think, oh, you're being racist to migrants. And it's the same with Muslims in my country. I mean, you can say, well, you can't be Islamophobic, but you can't really say that to a man who earns less than £20,000 a year, who is watching his daughters be repeatedly raped by Muslim grooming gangs, and he is being actively prevented from helping by the police. If you don't think that's going to generate some kind of extreme right-wing position, then you're nuts. And the fact that we allow that to happen, and in fact, a lot of this is to do with far-left ideology, calling people racist, and the power that the word racist has. It destroys people's lives to be labeled as a racist. And the left slings this out like it's just candy. Like there's no tomorrow. Just, everyone's a racist. You're all racists. And it's got to the point now where in my country especially, the police were just afraid of arresting Muslim men who were caught with 12-year-old girls, were giving them drugs and alcohol and raping them. They were afraid of arresting them because of left-wing racial ideology, and I'm just done with it. I'm not going to pretend these aren't problems that are happening. I can understand why these people are annoyed about it. Yes, their solutions are utterly unacceptable, but we're not going to pretend like these problems don't exist just because we don't like them.
okay, so you're saying that their problems don't exist, but I would say okay.
I'm saying
So
their problems do exist.
okay, so you're saying okay, sorry. So you're saying they do exist. I'm
Yes.
just if their solution is that they want a white ethno state or they believe in white
Yeah.
supremacy, why would their problems necessarily be legitimate? Because if that's their answer, wouldn't there be ridiculous motives in that? So okay, here's my question.
It doesn't.
How do you
Okay.
go
Okay.
from hold on, hold on. How do you go from being called a racist and then be like, I want a white ethno state? How does that happen?
I'm sure. I'm sure they are racists. I'm sure the alt-right. I mean, a lot of them will just openly avow, yeah, we're racists. And so, good job in helping them coalesce, I suppose. But the difference is the problem that is creating the racists. It still exists, even if you suppress the racists. And so this problem is creating more and more racists by the day. And many of these people didn't start as racists. They didn't start as ethnostaters going, right, that's it. We're sick of diversity, of foreigners, of non-white people. We just want them out. We're sick of being told that we are bad because we're white, right? It's not that they started that way. It's just that they have been in a system that has not even-handedly treated them and other people and has told them to shut up on the basis that they're white, and any criticism of this is racist. And so now they're just like, okay, fine, I will be a racist, get them out of my country. I don't agree with them. I want the system to treat all people within it even-handedly, without favor based on race or gender or sexuality or whatever.
Okay. So okay. Okay. So what you're basically
Like,
saying is
don't worry about what the alt-right solutions are, but the fact that the alt-right exists is concerning, and whatever it is that made it exist, we need to deal with that in a sensible liberal way.
could you explain sort of the pathway or like maybe an example of a pathway that you have that goes from being called a racist to being either a white ethno state person or a white supremacist?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy for many people. For many of them, they used to really love Ron Paul because I think a lot of them really wanted to be left alone. I quite like Ron Paul myself, to be honest. But a lot of them, I think, just want to be left alone. And it's got to the point where identity politics is not going to leave them alone. And so they think that the only answer is to band together and become white identitarians and play the game of white identity politics. I think that the fact that we've been playing identity politics is the problem, but it's the left that's been doing it. And it seems pathologically adverse to abandoning this line of reasoning because it seems they don't really have very good arguments for anything. And so, I mean, this is why I said that the left seems to just be. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, I'm trying to think of a time where the left wasn't just basically a disempowerment movement. I mean, if you go back like 100 years, the Democrats were the ones that founded the KKK and were against ending slavery.
Those are not the liberals, though.
Of course, they weren't liberals. The Republicans were the liberals.
Yes.
You know, and so it's just like, okay, so you've got this collectivist group of people who are very racist and want to hold down black people, and then 100 years later you've got a bunch of people who are very collectivist and want to hold down white people. It's like, okay, how about we just not hold people down? We could just have a fair system that just treated people with dignity rather than castigating them on the basis of their race. I mean, you must remember the DNC, the sort of election campaign thing they did, where the woman, I can't remember her name, Sally something, she was just there saying, look, it's my job to shut down white people. And it's like, I mean, if you can't see that as being utterly radioactive, then
I think
enjoy
that's
another
completely
4 years of
reprehensible.
Trump.
I think that's completely reprehensible.
But why is it on your stage, man? The Republicans didn't have Richard Spencer on their stage.
I mean, well, why is that on our stage? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, she ran for DNC chair. I mean, what are you supposed to do? How do you
Okay,
get him
but
off
if a
the stage?
Nazi ran for a DNC chair, would you be like, well, I mean, I think it's reprehensible, but he ran for the DNC chair?
What do you mean? I didn't support the person.
Yeah, but there are some ideas
And also,
that shouldn't be.
I'm not denying that there is a group of people, and I've made videos going after identity politics and social justice warriors. I think it is a problem. I completely think so.
It's
but
a
I
massive
think that
problem.
I wouldn't call it a massive problem. I think
Oh,
it's a
it
problem.
definitely is. It's why you lost.
Well, that's where we disagree. I would say that we lost because of the Rust Belt, but I am just trying to.
Yeah, the white Rust Belt. Yeah.
Well, that has nothing to do with it. It was the fact that Trump went
Right.
left on free trade. I mean, are you really are you telling me that people in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin voted for Trump because they wanted to somehow combat this sort of racism that's coming from Hillary of going against whites?
I know that Vox.com certainly think that was the case.
That they voted.
There was a thing where something like 55% of Trump voters were sick of being racialized by the left. That was they felt personally attacked by the sort of racial and gendered identity politics. It's not just a small thing. It's international. It's in government. It's in media. It's everywhere. It's in every single hobby community that you can think of. Everyone is experiencing this. And so it's not a small thing, and it's not going away. And to your credit, to speak out against this, and you and Kyle Kalinske and David Pakman, I mean, like there are lots of progressives that I would have zero respect for, but you guys aren't among them. I'm more than happy to have a cordial conversation with you guys and treat you as equals in a debate and in a discussion, because you have the integrity to say, look, I don't agree with that. Now, I mean, you've got a different perspective on the scope of the problem that I do, and that's fine. That's completely fine. Everyone's allowed their own interpretation. But at least you can call out these things as being reprehensible, whereas so many people on the left think it's a moral good. It's honestly, it blows my mind.
Well, again, I would say that if you take your average everyday left-winger, they're not going to be in agreement with let's hold whites down, especially considering that most people are white.
Well, they're not going to say it like that, obviously. They're not going to say it like that, but they're going to say something like check your privilege.
I don't think they would do that either. You think that
I
the
think
average person is going to say, average person who's working 8-hour days, whatever, 5 times a week, full time, you're going to see them and they're going to say check your privilege?
Yeah, but that's the average person probably isn't a far lefty.
Okay, so now you're talking about far left, not left.
Well, yeah, but I consider progressivism to be a far left philosophy.
You consider progressivism to be far left philosophy.
Yeah.
But you're specifically talking about the feminists and social justice warriors they make videos on.
Yeah, but I mean that's basic bitch progressivism these days.
Okay, so that's okay. So basically, what you're trying to get at here is our disagreement is you think it's a bigger problem than I do.
Well, I mean that's definitely that seems to be the case. Yeah, I mean, like at least we can agree that this thing's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a good start.
So okay, so are where how do you what are your solutions to this whole thing? I know that it's going to be let's get rid of this stuff, but are
Well, it's going to
you
have to be.
yeah, of course. And I would agree with that solution as well, obviously. But
Mm.
my thing is that I think that you have basically taken this and you've essentially lost everything that you've claimed to support, whether it be things that you don't cover, even though they're happening under the Trump administration. And I think that people, you say you're left wing, but I feel like you don't end up defending anything left wing whatsoever.
That's because everything I defend is cast out of the left. I defend lots of people who consider themselves to be left wing until they are confronted with a group of angry progressives who can't accept them not being adherents of identity politics, and then suddenly they're no longer left wing. I mean, I get told I'm not left wing. The loads of these people, like James Damore, Lindsay Shepherd, they probably consider themselves conservatives now, but they didn't start as conservatives. They thought they agreed with all of the sort of policies. I mean, like I use people's pronouns. I think that's just a basic politeness. I don't mind doing it. And I know a lot of these other people do as well, and yet they're told they're not left wing anymore. It's like, okay, well, I mean, I defend people who used to be left wing. There's like ex-Muslims, I guess.
Okay. So what I'm just trying to get at is, I guess these certain examples that I brought up, either you haven't looked at them enough, or you're not really in support of those.
Well, I'm,
But
I'm not like a policy wonk, so I don't. I mean, I'm just one guy. I'm not like the Young Turks or something. I don't have a research crew or a studio or anything like that. I'm just a guy with a computer and a microphone. And so, I mean, I spend all day, every day studying and researching specific things that I'm trying to talk about. Like, I don't have time to just follow Washington, D.C. politics all day, every day. I wouldn't be able to get anything productive done that I'm trying to achieve. So, I mean, I'm not like a policy guy in that regard, I'm afraid.
okay, so I sort of see what you're saying there, but I would argue that things that are super important and that are very forefront, and not really what I would necessarily consider super policy wonkish, even though you could kind of consider it that way.
Hmm.
Like things that Trump proposes, I would like to see some criticisms of them because
Hmm.
you say you're left wing. So I mean,
Well, I mean, I to be honest with you, when I want that right, do you know what's very interesting? I use Kyle Kalinske and Ben Shapiro as my Trump reporters.
yeah.
I find them very reliable in that regard because Kyle is a fundamentally honest man, and I really respect that about him. And so even when he's being biased, he's still honest. And Ben Shapiro hates Trump, but he hates the left even more. And so he doesn't he can't help but have to defend Trump sometimes when it's appropriate, and obviously he doesn't when it's not appropriate. And so I get quite an entertaining and balanced view of that. But for me, to be honest, Trump at this point, like, it's just the fact that he pisses off the right people that I support Trump over. Although I've got to say, I think his international diplomacy was surprisingly effective. This is another thing that drives me crazy about the left is they don't. Oh, the left's become really obsequious, like like Kim Jong Un, right? He's a dictator. There is only one thing a dictator understands, and that's strength. They are the sole point of force in their country. All power comes from them, and people freaked out when Trump just started trash talking him on Twitter. But that's the best way to do it. You've got to knock this little man back into line. He's got to understand his place in the pecking order because he thinks that his place is at the very top. And like the Obama administration treating him with kid gloves, it's like, dude, go in there and fucking shake his shit up. And that's what Trump did on Twitter. And lo and behold, I mean, I know he's like, well, if you're doing exercises now, I'm going to renege on this meeting. But it's the only way to deal with these people.
Okay, so I would actually disagree on what you just said. I don't think that had anything to do with it. I would think that it had to do with, and I think that this is what happened. Is basically I don't know really how deep I want to get into this, but basically
Mhm.
after the former South Korean president was convicted and put in
Indicted, yeah.
jail, yeah, the new president had Moon Jae-in. He is somebody who had run on peace, and that's what he has been doing for a long time. And he's giving credit to Trump because he knows that there were reports that Trump was pressuring him to give him credit, as well as he knows that that's the best way to get it through, because if he doesn't get credit, he's going to throw a wrench in. And now what we have now is I've read some reports that summit talks may have been canceled. So I don't think that was caused, but I don't think it's an interesting enough topic to get into.
Yeah, well, I think it is an interesting topic, but it is kind of off topic. But I think that this is just a sort of left-wing narrative in order to downplay Trump's effect on this. I mean, you can't say that Trump hasn't had a massive effect on the politics of the region just by using his Twitter account, which is pretty amazing. And I think he does have a key role in that, because it's all to do with the psychology of the person that he's attacking on Twitter, basically. But yeah, we can carry on to the next thing. Sorry.
Okay. So something I wanted to really quickly touch on here. You have had some disagreements with David Pakman somewhat recently. I don't remember how long ago it was. But I don't want to get into the argument because I can't speak for him, and I'm not going to argue for him. But I wanted to know if you would be interested in having a conversation with him.
Oh, of course. And he can email me anytime, and I'd love to set up a conversation with him.
What were some of the disagreements you guys had?
The disagreements really are on the definition of socialism. He made a video, I made a response video. He responded to my response video and mischaracterized me in the first 5 minutes, and his own audience kind of let him have it. And since his own audience were grilling him over his misrepresentation of what I'd said, I kind of left it because it seemed that the point had been made.
Okay, so that's interesting.
But basically, he would like to call Scandinavian countries socialist, and they are not socialist countries. So,
well, when do you think is going to be the next video that you put out criticizing the right?
I don't know. I'm going into postmodernism at the moment, so I mean, it just I'm not bothered about the left-right divide anymore. I've come to the point where I don't care about that kind of tribalism at all. So I'm more interested now in identifying political philosophies and ones that I think are incompatible with liberalism and addressing them directly. I mean, this is the thing. You say, when's the next time I'm going to criticize the right? I've spent the last 3 months in a sort of war with the alt-right.
Yes,
I'm kind of sick of them, so it's I kind of want to get back onto what I'm doing. But I mean, I'm going to be working on a video after this interview about how everyone's racist towards Nazis, which is interesting. Okay. But honestly, I don't see the right as being an existential threat to the liberal order of the West at this point. You might disagree with the compassion of their policies, which I think is a fair thing to disagree with. But I don't think it's going to ruin our nations. Whereas the left absolutely will. I mean, like the left's mass immigration. If I saw, I mean, like I should probably do a video about Ben Shapiro and open borders, because he's said this multiple times. But obviously, as a pro-Israel advocate, he's not advocating for open borders for Israel, is he? Yeah. And so there's definitely hypocrisy there. But I just don't see these people as being as powerful as you think. Like,
what has Ben Shapiro said about open borders?
Oh, he's a sort of like he's very libertarian when it comes to that. That's another thing I hate about the libertarians, is that they've got a really malformed conception of the state, thinking that you can have open borders and a state, which you can't. But yeah, he's for open borders, and I'm not for open borders. I'm for a very stringent immigration policy at this point. So yeah, that's. I mean, I could do videos criticizing that, but I don't know. I mean, really, I'll probably be doing one about Brexit with our Conservative Party, who are basically progressives in all but name. It's crazy. I mean, you would think that a Conservative Party would come into power, see what a bunch of socialists have done to the country, and want to reverse that, but they haven't. And they just seem to be carrying it on. Like, I mean, in my country, we're getting 330,000 immigrants in a year, right? Or 300,000, roughly that sort of number. And we've had that since about the year 2000. And that, I mean, obviously that's millions of people at this point. And they're not just evenly dispersed across the country either. And so we're getting kind of ethnic ghettos springing up in the north of England. And this is causing real friction, real problem with the working classes in England. They're really bothered about this. It's really hurting them. And the Conservative government are still letting in 300,000 people a year. It's like, why wouldn't you stop it? I don't understand why they're carrying on. But I mean, this isn't really a left-right divide. It's really a sort of corporatist, nativist divide. You know, it's entirely in the interests of huge corporations to allow complete freedom of movement across the entire globe, because then they get everything cheaper. But it's not in the interest of the people living in these places, which is what I care about.
So how do you feel about how do you feel about the Tories sort of funding less and stay? I've heard that Theresa May or some of the Tories want to privatize parts of the NHS. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm not in favor of that. I think if it's going to be a public utility, it should be a public utility. If it's going to be a private utility, it should be a private utility, because otherwise what you're going to end up with is something like the lend lease program or something. What was the program called in Iraq, where they would, if the company lost a truck or something, the US government would give them the value of the truck and then a percentage on top of that. Do you remember that?
I'm not sure. No, I don't remember.
I'd have to look at it. It was years ago that I remember looking into this. But basically, that meant that you'd get a bunch of contractors going out there, like Halliburton, like, Dick Cheney's company. Yeah. This, yeah. If they blew a tire, they wouldn't replace the tire. They'd just scrap the vehicle and then go and claim it off the taxpayer. And that's the kind of thing I'd be worrying about with the Conservatives privatizing certain parts of the NHS. It'll be inevitably abused by private interests, and I don't want that. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much for the conversation. Do you have any last words before we end this off?
No. Well, thanks. It's been a really interesting conversation. I would recommend moving away from partisanship. That's what I would definitely recommend. I enjoy talking to people of all sort of political stripes, and it's always really interesting to see how they conceive of the world. But it's always difficult talking to someone like Stephen Crowder or someone like yourself, where you're American left or right wing partisans. You've got a specific set of points and narratives that you guys sort of throw at each other, and no actual discussion occurs. And so nobody's minds, I think, are really changed, and it's kind of digging trenches deeper between each of you. And this is a really worrying thing to me, because it's the demonization of the opponents, and not just in saying they're bad people, but they're stupid, they're unworthy of conversation. I mean, these are your fellow countrymen. If you can't stand to be around them, then eventually you're probably gonna take that a bit further, aren't you? So, and I think it's important that we have an English-speaking hegemon in the world, because English-speaking countries are liberal countries. They're very good at preventing tyranny. In fact, they've done it consistently for hundreds of years now, and I can't imagine a world order that would be better under a different country. I mean, I don't want to see China or Russia or India or any of these Asian countries taking on the role of the world hegemon that America has. And the more you guys begin to hate one another along partisan lines, the more unstable the United States becomes. And eventually it will find itself slipping from its position because of internal divisions. I mean, it's not going to be conquered from outside, it's going to be conquered from within. And it's incumbent on the citizens of the US, no matter how partisan they are, to get over their own biases and actually have a conversation with the other side.
Okay. I see. I kind of understand what you're saying. I do think that there's definitely that going on, and I think that it's more of a, I almost want to say it's almost like a cultural problem where we kind of get into just having sides versus sides, and I do see that problem for sure.
It's easy, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's easy. Say it's just, well, this is my team, right or wrong, I don't care. It's kind of like a form of political nationalism, and yeah, and I'm glad you can see it, because I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to it as well. It's as much as you might disagree with I can't imagine agreeing with very much with Tommy Lahren or something like that, you know. But the way I see the left talking about this woman, and I think, wow, that's a feminist position to call her all of those names. You know, it's rank hypocrisy and just outright hatred. And she's just one example, you know, of a right wing commentator. But she's just one of the ones that I see a lot in my newsfeed of progressives like saying really bad things, and it's just like, okay, come on. You know, she's a bit cliched, but she's not that bad. You know, she's not.
It kind of gets a little tingy there, but I sort of see what you mean.
You know what I mean?
I kind of see what you're saying, but again, I think that it gets very difficult when it comes to sides because anybody can claim a side, and there can be these kind of, it's hard to see. You have to distinguish people, is what I'm trying to say. But I see some of what you're saying, and I do agree that the tribalism is definitely becoming a problem.
Yeah, I'm glad that everyone can see it basically, because I think it's something I've been watching for a while, and it's just like, oh, this is going to end badly. That's kind of why I felt that Trump had to win, to be honest.
See, that's where I disagree, but I mean that's
well,
fine.
of course you do, but like I think that's because you're not taking the problems of the working class seriously.
I would argue that the policies that he's implementing are oftentimes against the working class.
It doesn't matter, as far as they're concerned. It's what he is rather than like what he does. I mean, Donald Trump is a pariah from the elite class in the United States. Like they treat him with no mercy whatsoever, and he then goes and talks to working class people in middle America in stadiums where he's just shit talking them and the media and all of the people who have got their noses in the air, and they love him for it. I mean, he like, why do they love him? Why is that something that appeals to them? You know, I mean, like after the election, after Van Jones running around screaming, "It's a white lash! It's a white lash!" Like he ended up going to, I don't know, like Ohio or some backwater place and talking with a poor white family, and this millionaire, he earns a million a year. This millionaire black guy is just sat there with this utterly impoverished white family going, wow, I can't believe you guys exist. This like totally changed my outlook, man. And it's like acting as if they are the ones who should be like, well, thank you so much. You know,
But was that one? Because I've seen clips of that, but I didn't see what you're describing. I saw we're against corrupt. We want to change because we don't like the status quo, and Hillary Clinton's corporate is garbage. Is that
yeah,
what you're
of
talking
course.
about, or are you talking
Yeah,
about
that's the one I'm
they're
talking about. But
demonizing white people?
no, of course, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like Van Jones, up until that point, had just been like, no, Trump supporters are racist, and now he's meeting white Trump supporters who aren't racist. They're desperate, and they want the mainstream and specifically the left to listen to them, because the left used to be about helping the working man, and it's become a very bourgeois movement at the moment, and it's very condescending in a class way to people of lower class and lower status. Incredibly condescending. And honestly, that's why I support Trump more than I ever have.
Okay, that's interesting. I think that's where we'll end it off because I don't think this will ever end. But
Okay.
okay, thanks so much, man. I appreciate it.
Anytime, man.
Yeah,
Anytime.
have a
Take
nice
care.
day. You too.